Hi, my name is Jerry with Christian Preppers, and this is the channel where we're trying to feed them, not shoot them, or don't shoot them, as it says on my shirt. But what I'm trying to do in my channel is help people have the mindset that in a disaster or significant event that we're actually helping other people. You know, it's often referred to as S hits TF, essentially the crap hitting the fan, right? So in these situations is where we want to try to help people and bless them. And one of the ways we get to help people and bless them is by learning how to treat people. Bleeding is the largest cause or the most significant cause of preventable death. Preventable death. So if more people out there knew how to treat bleeding, that more people's lives could be saved. So knowing how to control bleeding is a really big deal. It's like it could save literally tens of thousands of people's lives a year if people knew how to control bleeding better. And that's what I want to do in this video, is try to give you some more skills and help you be able to treat another person who has significant bleeding. So the very first thing I would recommend you do is get some training in how to pack a wound. So learning how to pack a wound is paramount. And if you're proficient at packing a wound, you don't actually need a tourniquet. So you don't need a tactical tourniquet if you're proficient at being able to pack a wound and essentially collapse the end of that wound or that vein where it's severed, and maybe even using some other things like hemostatic agents. So in Ukraine, we were told by the surgeons to stop using hemostatic agents. Now, why were they telling us to stop using hemostatic agents? Well, I never really found out, but this is my own personal theory. My own personal theory is that a lot of the gear and equipment that was being used in Ukraine was old, like very old. A lot of stuff was out of date. We were even using stuff that was out of date because it was the only stuff we could get our hands on, and it was better to use something than nothing. And I think that when it comes to hemostatic agents, the problem is a lot of the early hemostatic agents that were probably circulating, like I did see packets of Quick Clot, the old Quick Clot. I've seen lots and lots of packets of old Quick Clot. And the problem is older Quick Clot was, what was it, a hemothermal agent. And what that meant was it actually, when activated with the blood, it heated up and can actually burn the tissue around that area. So it had a thermal reaction with the blood and actually would burn the tissue. Now, the problem is the surgeons, when they get a person who's been treated with an older style clotting agent that has essentially burned the tissue, it essentially was a chemical cauterizing material. So it was chemically cauterizing, you're burning the flesh and the material around it to cauterize and stop the bleeding. The surgeons had to cut that out. So it added a significant amount of time. Plus, they were now having to cut out a wound that had been sealed and essentially reopening and restarting the bleed that they then had to address. So modern hemostatic agents, especially if they're pregnated, like Quick Clot, hemostatic or combat gauze, which is just a hemostatic treated or impregnated gauze that goes into the wound. And even though that stuff is not technically biodegradable, the body doesn't break it down, it's meant that when the bandage is pulled out, it brings anything that clotted and bonded to the bandage, it pulls it out with it. So it takes it with it. So when you remove the bandage, you remove anything that clotted and bonded with the bandage, all that stuff comes out with it. There's other hemostatic agents out there that are actually biodegradable, so that you could actually close up the wound around the clotting agent, and the body will just break it down and deal with it itself. So, but here's the bottom line. What you're trying to do with a serious bleed is you're trying to stabilize the person until they get to a surgeon. This is really, really important to understand. This is not the actual final treatment. So what you're just trying to do is you're trying to buy that person time to get to a surgeon. And that's really, really important if you're doing sort of wilderness first aid or wilderness survival or anything like that, where it could be days until you get to someone. Where, in my opinion, in that situation, learning how to pack a wound is much better, even much better than a tactical tourniquet. But now, where is it better, to use tactical tourniquets? And it's essentially if you don't really have any training, if you have minimalistic or virtually no training, these things will absolutely save a person's life. So some of the things that we're going to talk about too is like tissue necrosis, or things where the tissue is dying because there's no more oxygen getting to it because you put a tourniquet on. Here is the simple question. Is it better, or which is worse, I should say this, which is worse, to lose a limb or lose your life? It's a rhetorical question. It's obviously better to lose a limb, especially with modern prosthetics. You can still have a very, very good quality of life even after having losing a limb. What you can't have a good quality of life is after death. The only way to do that is with Jesus Christ. And, you know, that's absolutely the basis of everything that I do, is to promote Jesus Christ. But in this situation, we're trying to talk about stopping bleeding and keeping them alive. So what you're trying to do is prolong their lifespan so that they can get to a surgeon and have their life saved, where they can have a good and productive life, hopefully, right? So tourniquets in a low skill situation are absolutely life-changing, game-changing systems, pieces of kit to have, and I highly recommend everybody gets themselves a tourniquet. Now this is a trainer, this is a trainer, and as it turns out, this was also a trainer, but this one right here, even though it's got trainer on it, this is a cat tourniquet. Even though I'm not really liking the company that makes these for some personal reasons, this is a really good system. And if you're going to have a piece of kit that you're going to use to save a person's life, don't go cheap. Don't go cheap. One of the things on these cheaper systems, and I do think the cheaper systems have actually got better since we were using them in Ukraine. But one of the things that we kept having the windlass strap, which is this guy right here. I don't know if you can see it that well in the video, but there's a strap right here that the windlass is looped into. This kept blowing out. So we had multiple issues in Ukraine of those windlass straps blowing out. So you can even see in this trainer, and the reason why I'm using it in this video is this is a cat tourniquet. So this is essentially the best quality tourniquet you can get. And if you can see that windlass strap, that thing is all stretched and wrinkled, and I would absolutely not trust this tourniquet in a real life situation. If it was literally the only thing I've got, it's better than nothing, right? So at the end of the day, don't throw away. Don't throw away a tourniquet ever. You definitely want to mark on a trainer like we did in this one, make it very notable that this is for training, but keep using it for training. It really drives me nuts. I teach a specialty bleeding course, which is life-saving bleeding, essentially. Stop life-threatening bleeding is the name of the course. And in that course, we do go into depth in tourniquets, how to apply them, how to put them on, when to use them, so on and so on. And it drives me nuts that people will use their kit gear in the class and then go and put it back in their kit. You want to practice, and that's why I would highly recommend you do buy at least one cheap tourniquet. One cheap tourniquet. You're not going to be afraid to use this because you only paid $15-20 for it, as opposed to, you know, whatever you get this thing for, $40, $35-40, or whatever price they are now. Get a cheap trainer tourniquet and use it, and have the whole family use it. Have the whole family understand how to put these on, where they can put on, how they put them on in correlation to the wound, just different things like that I'm going to teach you here in this video. But I think it's really, really important that the first time that you're trying to use a piece of kit is not in a life-threatening situation. You have to have some kind of training. You want to build up some memory, some muscle memory of how to use these tourniquets in a life-threatening situations to be proficient. Why do you want to be proficient? Well, your artery is essentially the size of your pinky, right? So it's a wee garden hose, right? It's, if you imagine a garden hose, you've got like this wee garden hose, this small garden hose that runs throughout your body, bringing oxygenated blood that circulates through all your body, that leads into all the tissue and everything else. In the end, the blood is returned through your veins. So you have arteries that deliver oxygenated blood, and you have veins that return it. Now, why is that important? Well, everybody has cut themselves at some point. So what you've done is you've cut a vein. Otherwise, if it was an artery, we probably wouldn't be having this. You're probably not watching this video, right? But so when you cut yourself, you cut a vein. You've seen the color of the blood. So everybody has seen the color of their own blood, and it's a slightly darker red than oxygenated blood. Oxygenated blood is a brighter red. So what's the significance of that is? Well, it's very important because you know what your own blood looks like, and if you can't really remember, the next time that you cut yourself or you even are putting a band-aid on your kid, pay attention to the color of the blood, because that is your standard sort of deoxygenated blood that's being returned to get reoxygenated and then pumped back out through the arteries. So essentially what the blood you see is blood that's actually actively being returned to being reoxygenated. So that blood, when you notice that color, the significance of that is if you ever see anything that's a different color, a brighter color than that, it's oxygenated blood, and that's being delivered through an artery. So other telltale signs is if you see it becoming essentially aerosolized, as if you took a spray and sprayed it into the air. Sometimes it can become aerosolized. A lot of times it's just pumping, just spurting. If it has access to an open area, if it has access cleanly out of the wound, a lot of times you will see it pump, and it can shoot quite a distance. So I've seen people that get hit in the face with an arterial bleed. And then the other part is where the wound is kind of messy and somewhat compressed in some form, through clothing, or there's just tissue in there, or the thing that cut the artery is still in there and kind of in the way. So what you might see is you might see pooling, and the pooling might seem consistent, but if you can kind of clean it out of the way, what you're trying to look and see is if there's actually any pumping. So you're looking for surges in the pooling of blood. All of those are indicators of an arterial bleed. And now the clock is ticking. Now, you can't highlight enough the importance of the clock ticking and that preventable death, that bleeding being the number one preventable death. And try to reiterate this again, preventable death. What does it mean? It means that these are people who die, who their lives could have been saved if people knew how to stop the bleeding better. So bleeding is the largest cause of preventable death in the world, in America. And I know there's Americans that think that the world stops at the American borders, but bleeding is the largest cause of preventable death in the world, according to the research I was able to do. So dealing with that and treating with that, you could absolutely be saving a person's life. Identifying if it's an arterial bleed and having that quick response to an arterial bleed is absolutely vital. And that's where having a tourniquet, if you don't really have skills, is vital. Having a tourniquet without skills is vital. If you are proficient at wound packing, go to work. If you're blessed, if you're in that situation where you happen to have your gear with you, and you can almost immediately start packing that wound and getting it packed, collapse the end of that vein and get that addressed. To me, that is the number one priority of what you would do is if you are proficient. You can, even if you want, put the tourniquet on. And if anyone out there disagrees with what I said, hey, let's get a conversation going in the comments. I love to learn. I love to hear people's perspectives. I have some real world perspectives myself. So that I got in Ukraine, treating people in the front lines. So, but it's not like I'm an expert, right? I have my own personal experiences of treating people, but there's people out there with way more experience than me that got to pit on, hundreds of these things and got to help and bless people. Okay. So I want to hear from you. I want to hear your perspective on what I'm saying. And then when you leave a comment, other people that have watched this video get to read your comment and they get to hear your perspective, which is why it's really important to get a dialogue going over this. There's a lot of people on there and they're training tourniquets. They're not really giving a lot of information, right? They're not helping people really understand what's going on. And that's what I'm trying to do in this video is help you actually understand and the clock is ticking. So why is it vital if you see or you identify a arterial bleed or a bleeding from an artery? Is because you literally in most cases have just minutes. So the average person has anywhere from 4.5 to 6 liters of blood in their body. So let's just say 5. So if your heart is pumping really efficiently and you've got a garden hose the size of your pinky, you can understand how just minutes of this efficient pump that is your heart pumping the blood out of your body through a garden hose, a pinky sized garden hose in your body, you can lose blood very, very quickly. So what I was trained in one of the classes that I took, what I was trained is you have 37 seconds. Now, when you do research, you might not be able to find anything to validate that. But what the person was trying to relay in that training is after just 37 seconds, and I don't believe it was an arbitrary number that they just picked up. I believe that they had some reason to believe that after 37 seconds that you have lost enough blood from an unattended arterial bleed or unabated arterial bleed, that you've lost enough blood from your system that it's going to start having some effect on your organs and your brain. So on your organs and your brain. And some people, I've had some of these discussions and they've argued against it, but you can have a shut off of oxygen to your brain that is just seconds, and it can cause unconsciousness or disorientation. So the loss of your ability to think through a situation and have situational awareness. So I have no problem with continuing to teach the 37 seconds. So a lot of places will teach after 2 to 3 minutes that you have lost enough blood that you are more than likely going to have some kind of catastrophic organ or brain failure. Either way, the clock is ticking. So in my classes, what I try to teach is I try to teach people that they have to have the tourniquet on within 37 seconds. In most cases, you can have the tourniquet on much quicker than 37 seconds, but that's the goal. The goal is, even if you can't do it in my class that day, your goal is to have it on in 37 seconds. So keep training, which is why your trainer is vital. It's really, really important, because it could be you treating yourself, it could be you treating a loved one, and being able to get that timing down, that's vital. So one of the things I'm going to teach you to do here is I'm going to teach you how to set a tourniquet for one-handed use. That is vital. So you can see in my arm right here, you can see my scar. That's a bullet wound. So it's like a freckle going in, and it blew out. You know, I've lost about 40% of my forearm muscle through that injury. So this arm's inoperable. And for a lot of people that I train, I'm not training like wartime situations where it's bullet wounds, whatever the case is. When I'm training people is people who are usually active at work. So the last class I just taught was a company of tree climbers and arborists, right? And they typically will see injuries that come across their body. So if you're right-handed, the injury is typically going to be on your left, to the left arm or the left leg. If you're left-handed, the injury is going to typically be to the right side. So now you shouldn't depend on that. But if you're in that industry where the greatest likelihood of injury is going to be work-related, statistically, the greatest likelihood of you being involved in a serious incident is a traffic accident. But then there's certain industries that they have a higher casualty rate or incident rate than just traffic accidents, serious injuries, or deaths. So in the tree industry, they are one of those industries that has a higher rate of incident than road traffic accidents. So they're more likely to see an incident on the workplace. And it could be that somebody has taken a cutting tool like your Silky or your Falco, your hand pruning saw, and they've raped their arm. They've done something with that. There's electric pruning shears or gas-powered pruning shears, or even your chainsaw in worst case scenario. I was involved in an incident where a guy cut right down the middle of his hand with a chainsaw. So the chainsaw, he went to grab the chain, but he was whiskey throttling it. So in the high stress situation, he clamped down and was trying to grab the saw and put his hand up like this, and the saw essentially cut right down his hand to his wrist right here. So that's a very serious injury, because the saw just rips and shreds everything in its way, and you have severe bleeding going on. So that hand is inoperable. This arm was inoperable. Essentially it went into shock. So knowing how to set a tourniquet for one-handed use is really vital. Now here's the thing. There's multiple ways to set a tourniquet for one-handed use. But what I try to teach people is what I believe is the simplest, easiest way to set a tourniquet for one-handed use. So let's get into it. So by the way, if you have a tourniquet, because in a pinch, you can still use your trainer. Like I said, use what you got. You know, if you find, if you're looking online and you see that the buckle has a double loop right here, do not buy it. Do not buy the double loops. What we found in Ukraine was the inside the double loop, the little arm inside, they kept breaking. So when we were trying to cinch them down and pull them tight, they kept breaking. I do think that even the cheap tourniquets have got a wee bit better, which means that they'll last you longer for training. But still, please do not have this as part of your primary kit. Okay, so you can just open up your tourniquet, get it fully open. You're going to take the tip. So you want your back plate. Facing up. So this is the tourniquet back plate, right? This is the front with the windlass. So the windlass is pointing down. The back plate is up, and you're just going to take this and feed it through the buckle. All right. So feed it through the buckle. Now, what you're looking to do here is you're looking to get an adequate size right here, and this is the important part. Is this distance right here? Is the important part. That's what you're going to try to match. And it might take you a couple of times. Now, what's this based upon? This could be based upon the size of the pocket that it's going to go into, the size of the holder. I've had problems with holders, with hard holders over the years. I much prefer a soft holder, especially if it's got a wee bit of flex in it. Those are much better to put your tourniquet in. So this is the important part right here, is this distance. So what you're trying to do, if I can get this all into the camera, is you're going to fold this over. But what you're trying to do is you're going to try to fold it over. And it might take you a few times to get this. You're trying to fold it over so that when you then double it over, you're essentially coming to this buckle. All right. Now, I've got a little bit of a high spot right here, which means my original fold is just a wee bit too long. So what I just do is I take it and I open it. And when I redo it, I fall short. So I come a little shorter than what I originally was. So now when I fold it over, there we go. Nice and flat. Oh, nice and flat. Okay. So now what I just do is I just fold it over one more time. Because what I want is I want this nice sandwich so that when I show it to you, I've got this nice sandwich and it can go pretty flat. So I don't have any areas sticking out. I don't have anything that's neat or not neat and not tidy. Okay. So I've got this. And this is how you want to set your tourniquet for one-handed use. All right. This is your time strap. On the cheaper tourniquets, honestly, when we try to open these, they just kept going away. They just kept breaking and flying off, right? So here's what's really important. When you set your tourniquet, you have to take the time stop and move it over to the edge. What I actually prefer to do is get a little bit like this. Now, if it folds back like that, that's fine. If it folds back when you store it in your pocket and eventually it gets creased and just sits like that, that's fine. You're still going to be able to get a finger hold on it and pull it over. In a situation, a high stress situation, you may not have a Sharpie on you. You may not be able to write the time. Like I said, the time is really important when it comes to understanding, any kind of tissue death that's in the body. Just dip your finger in the blood and write it on your forehead. All right. So we just folded this. How's it going to work? Well, if you deploy your tourniquet, you have in a pocket or whatever the case is, and you deploy your tourniquet, it will literally just fold open like that with one hand. So what I recommend is I'm right-handed, and like I said, because it would come across my, if I'm working and I'm doing some kind of work where I come across my body and I can deploy my tourniquet and I'm holding it by the windlass right here, this just falls out. So now I have an injured hand. I can go ahead and start to deploy this, start to put it on. Now, I like to put it on like this, because when I set it up, it's already in the right position because I have my strap right here. Okay, so it's important to me, at least, and you can practice whatever the case is that you have just pulled this out. It's just opened up for one-handed use. You've got your loop. It's right here. Okay, this hand's inoperable, and you can start putting it on. If it turns out that this is just better for you, okay, to do that, you're going to have to practice like this, where the windlass is in this position. Okay? But then what happens is when you're tightening away from your body. I prefer to tighten across my body because I'm stronger that way. I'm stronger. I'm able to tighten better across my body, and that's, to me, that's really important in getting that initial cinch. All right, this is already a really long video. I'm going to, well, you know what? Minute long enough. I just need to do the rest. Okay, so I have opened it, took it out of my kit. It's like this. I'm then going to essentially slide it on. I get it onto an area where I think it's going to work well. So here's the deal. There's a thing called high and tight. All right. How do you know where to put a tourniquet on? Let me see if I can get a good angle for this right here. So for this injury right here, I'm like a south prop. So for this injury right here, typically you take 2 fingers, right? And that's similarly, it's 2 inches. For a wound this big, I don't know if the vein or the artery has retracted. So maybe I want to go 3 fingers, approximately 3 inches back, right? Now here's the issue. 3 inches, I'm starting to get very close to the joint. Okay? So if I'm getting too close to that joint, too close to the bone, okay, I don't want to put my tourniquet there. So what I'm going to do is then I'm going to go above into the bicep, okay? Because what we're trying to do with this vein is we're trying to get all the flesh and the muscle and the tissue around it to clamp down. We're trying to get it to compress, to clamp down where it collapses the vein. Similar as if you stood on the garden hose. You're trying to get the vein to collapse. And that's what the tourniquet's trying to do. If you've got a bone, something rigid in the way of that vein and you're trying to clamp down, the bone could prevent you from getting something to clamp down on the backside of the vein. And you may not get a proper seal. So when you put a tourniquet on, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to collapse this mini garden hose that's in your body and shut off the blood. You don't want any more blood getting in there. So if you get too close to the bone, just go high. Now, why am I going to go roughly about here? Well, I'm going to go here because I want to leave some room. I want to leave some room that I can go above it. There was one soldier in particular in Ukraine, and he had really, really big thighs, and I had to use 2 tourniquets to stop the bleeding. So you want to have the room to go above this tourniquet to put another one on, but you can't go into the joint. You can't go into the pocket. So with the groin, you can't go into any pockets. You can't go into the armpit because you're not going to be able to cinch that down. So we've got the tourniquet, and I've got the windlass right here. If you're putting it on somebody else, you can put the windlass towards you, whatever's convenient to you. So the windlass could be out here, okay? But if you're putting it on yourself, you want the windlass here with easy access, all right? So now I'm grabbing this thing, and I am going to pull on this as tight as I can and come around, right? And set myself up right here. So I've got myself set up right here, okay? And now I can go ahead and start turning on the windlass until there is no bleeding. You turn the windlass, okay, until there is no bleeding, even if the person is screaming at you. I have had people, when I put the tourniquet on, were screaming and begging for me to stop. You don't stop. You don't stop until the blood has stopped. It doesn't matter how much you're hurting the person. You do not stop. And I'm telling you, putting a tourniquet on properly will hurt the person. And even over a prolonged period of time, they're going to have pain. You do not take it off. You do not touch that tourniquet. If anything, I would duct tape my tourniquet sometimes. You know, you don't want, in any kind of transport or anything going on, you do not want this thing coming apart. So you've got this thing twisted until the blood is stopped. You then lock it in one of these little, I might be able to show you better in this one. Right here, you've got this little sort of C channels on both sides. That's where the windlass goes in. So the windlass goes into those C channels and it will hold it. So it's like a self-locking system. Then you can open up and come over. You take your time stamp and you go across. Okay? That is a good installation of a tourniquet. So that's what you're looking to do. Hey, if you have any other questions, Comments, please leave your comments, like I said, and comment on this if you've got some experience, especially. Please bless us with the wisdom of your experience so that we can all learn and glean from it. But if there's anything else that you want me to do a video on, just, hey, let me know. Hey, God bless.